I never thought I'd say this, but seeing the empty seat in the front row where my father was supposed to be felt like a physical blow to the chest, more than any tackle I'd ever taken on the field. Imagine standing there, the gold medal literally being draped around your neck, the crowd roaring your name. And the only person you ever wanted to impress is probably at home, or worse, at his office, completely oblivious to the fact that his only son just became the state champion. Was I wrong for feeling like that when meant absolutely nothing without his eyes on me? Or was I just a desperate kid chasing a shadow that was never going to catch up? I really need you all to tell me if I'm overreacting, because right now, I feel like I just won the biggest battle of my life only to realize I'd already lost the war at home. To understand why that empty chair hurt so much, you have to understand the man who was supposed to be sitting in it. My dad, Marcus, isn't a bad guy in the traditional sense. He doesn't yell, he isn't mean, and he provides everything we could ever need. But he is a man of spreadsheets and deadlines, a high-level executive who treats his family like a secondary project that's already been completed. Growing up, I was the kid who always had the best cleats, the most expensive equipment, and a private coach, but I never had a dad who actually watched me use any of it. My mom, Sarah, did her best to fill the gaps, but there's a specific kind of validation a son looks for from his father, and for me, it was like trying to get blood from a stone. I started wrestling when I was 7 because I saw an old trophy in the attic from when he was in high school. I thought if I could just match his achievements, he'd finally look at me and see himself. I spent 10 years molding my body and my mind into a weapon just for that one moment of connection. This year, my senior year, was everything. I had gone undefeated, tearing through the regional brackets with a single-minded focus. Every night at the dinner table, I'd try to tell him about my matches. I'd describe the intensity of a pin or the strategy of a takedown, and he'd just nod while looking at his phone, saying things like, "That's great, sport," or "Keep up the hard work, it builds character." He didn't even know what weight class I was in. He'd check his watch during my stories, as if I were a meeting that was running 5 minutes over. I remember one specific Tuesday where I'd beaten the reigning state runner-up in a dual meet. I was beaming, my face still red from the exertion, and I sat down to tell him how I'd used a double-leg takedown to seal the deal. He just pushed a plate of expensive organic chicken toward me, and told me he'd read an article about how athletes need more potassium. No good job. No, tell me more. Just a clinical focus on the mechanics of my existence without any interest in my soul. 2 weeks before the state finals, I sat him down and looked him dead in the eye. I told him, "Dad, this is it. The finals are on Saturday at 2 p.m. It's at the City Arena. I'm the #1 seed. If I win this, I get a full-ride scholarship. I need you there. Not just Mom, but you." He actually put his phone down for a second, looked at me and said, "I wouldn't miss it for the world, son. I'll clear the schedule. I'll make sure the team knows I'm out for the afternoon." I wanted to believe him so badly. I spent the next 14 days training until my lungs burned and my muscles screamed, all while envisioning him standing up in that crowd and cheering. I'd visualize the moment he'd walk down from the bleachers, put his hand on my shoulder, and finally see me as a man. On the morning of the competition, I woke up to a note on the kitchen counter. He had already left for the office to tie up some loose ends so he could leave early. My mom gave me a reassuring smile, saying he'd be there by the time the first whistle blew, her voice carrying that practiced optimism she'd used for years to cover for his absence. When I got to the arena, the atmosphere was electric. The smell of sweat and floor wax was thick in the air, and the sound of hundreds of people shouting was deafening. I went through my warm-ups like a machine, but every 5 minutes, I was scanning the entrance. My mom arrived and sat down, waving at me. The seat next to her was empty. My quarter-final match came and went. I won in less than 2 minutes. I looked up. Empty. Between matches, I sat in the tunnels, my heart racing faster than it did on the mat. I kept imagining his car breaking down, or him getting stuck in an elevator. Anything to justify why he wasn't there yet. I didn't want the truth to be that he just didn't care enough to leave the office. The semifinals were a bloodbath, a grueling 6-minute match against a kid who was just as hungry as I was. I left the mat with my skin stinging and my head throbbing, having won by a single point. I looked up again, wiping blood from my lip, hoping to see his face. Still empty. My mom was texting furiously, her face tight with worry, her eyes darting toward the arena doors every time someone walked in. I had an hour before the final match for the state title. I went into the locker room and tried to call him. It went straight to voicemail. I felt this cold, heavy knot forming in my stomach, a mix of anger and pure, unadulterated disappointment. I realized then that I wasn't just wrestling for a medal anymore. I was wrestling against the feeling of being invisible. I looked at myself in the mirror, the blue singlet tight against my chest, and I realized I had been competing against a ghost my entire life. When they called my name for the final championship match, I walked out onto the mat under the bright spotlights. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, and for a moment, I felt like a gladiator. I looked at the VIP section where my mom was sitting. She was alone, looking down at her lap, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline that had gone dead. That was the moment I knew he wasn't coming. The match started, and I played like a man possessed. I wasn't just technical. I was aggressive, almost to a fault. My opponent was strong, but he didn't have the sheer spite that was fueling me. Every time he tried to throw me, I thought of every dinner spent talking to the back of a laptop screen. Every time he tried to pin me, I thought of every empty seat at every graduation, every award ceremony, and every birthday dinner he was 10 minutes late for but never showed up to. I remember the final seconds so clearly, the roar of the crowd, the referee's hand slamming onto the mat signaling the pin, and the realization that I had done it. I was the champion. My teammates rushed the mat, lifting me onto their shoulders. It should have been the happiest moment of my life. But as I sat there on their shoulders, looking out over the sea of faces, all I could see was that one vacant spot. It felt like a hole in the universe. I went through the medal ceremony, took the pictures, and shook the hands, but I was a ghost. My coach gave me a bear hug, telling me he was proud of me, and for a split second, I wished he was my father. When I finally got back to the car with my mom, she didn't even try to make excuses. She didn't say he got busy or work is demanding. She just held my hand and said, "I'm so sorry, honey." We drove home in silence, the neon lights of the city blurring past the window, the heavy gold medal sitting in my lap like a lead weight. When we pulled into the driveway, his car was there. The house was glowing with warm, welcoming lights, looking like the picture-perfect home he paid for, but never inhabited. I walked into the house, and he was sitting on the couch with his laptop open, a glass of scotch on the table, looking like he'd been there for hours. He looked up totally calm and said, "Hey, how did the meet go? Did you place?" I just stood there, clutching my gold medal so hard the edges were cutting into my palm. He didn't even know it was over. He hadn't even checked the time. He had gotten caught up in a conference call with a client in London, and completely lost track of the entire day. He didn't even apologize. He just asked if I wanted to go out for a celebratory steak, as if a piece of meat could fill the 18-year void he'd left in my life. So that's the situation I was in. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a seat at his table, only for him to not even bother showing up to mine. I had to make a choice right then about how I was going to handle the rest of our relationship. Before I tell you what I did next and how I finally broke the cycle, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have accepted the steak dinner and moved on? Or would you have reached your breaking point like I did? I didn't say a word to him. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, and I certainly didn't go get steak. I simply walked over to the trash can in the kitchen, dropped my state championship gold medal right on top of the coffee grounds, and walked upstairs to start packing my bags. He followed me, finally looking panicked, asking what I was doing and why I was being so dramatic. He started talking about the investment he'd made in my career, mentioning the private coaches and the travel fees, as if fatherhood was a transaction he'd already settled. I told him that if he couldn't find the time to watch me win it, then I didn't need the trophy to remind me of his absence. I told him that he wasn't a father, he was just a benefactor, and I was done being his tax-deductible hobby. I moved out that night to stay with my older cousin, dragging my duffel bags past him as he stood in the hallway, looking genuinely confused for the first time in his life. It took 3 months of him calling and leaving messages before I finally agreed to meet him in a neutral place. He tried to tell me I was being disrespectful, but I told him that respect is a two-way street, and for 18 years, I had been the only one driving on it. I explained to him that while he was busy building an empire of spreadsheets, he'd let his home crumble into a house of strangers. The aftermath was messy and painful. My mom ended up having a serious come-to-Jesus talk with him about his priorities, revealing years of her own resentment that she'd hidden to keep the peace for my sake. They actually went into marriage counseling because my departure highlighted just how much he had checked out of the family. He had to face the reality that he was about to lose everything that actually mattered for the sake of a job that would replace him in a week if he dropped dead. As for me, I took that scholarship and moved 3 states away. I started my college career without checking my phone for his approval. We talk now, occasionally, but the dynamic has shifted entirely. He's the one who calls me now. He's the one who asks about my day, and he's the one who sounds disappointed when I'm too busy to talk. He knows now that I don't need his validation to be successful, and he's the one who has to put in the effort to be a part of my life. I realize that your worth isn't defined by who shows up to cheer for you, but by the fact that you had the strength to show up for yourself. It was a hard lesson to learn at 18, but it's the most valuable one I've ever received. I spent so long looking for my reflection in his eyes, but I finally found it in the mirror instead. Looking back, I don't regret throwing that medal away for a second, because it was the only thing that finally made him see me. It wasn't the victory that changed things, it was the way I handled the defeat of my expectations. I am more than a gold medal, and I am certainly more than a secondary project. Like this video if you were on my side and think I did the right thing by standing my ground. Subscribe for more stories like this where we dive into the real, raw side of family and life. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did I go too far, or was it long overdue? I'll see you all in the next story.